Alright, it's time for me to finish my little journey into multidimensional physics and trying to scientifically rationalize the existence of God. Now, yesterday I sort of poorly explained how fourth dimension beings would view the previous dimensions, so I wanted to cover this a little bit better. So, for our third dimensional things, we have length, width, and depth, right? So we have our little cube here, and it is like so. You know, we've all drawn this a million times in school out of pure boredom. And of course, for us, then the second dimension is a plane, theoretically extending into infinity in all directions. Right? And then the first dimension would be a line extending to infinity in all directions, and then the zeroth dimension would of course be the point, right? So this is 3, that's 2, that's 1, and that's 0, correct? And in fact, it's not technically 0, it's a naught. But anyway, so this is for third dimension. Oh, and I'm drawing off the screen again. Let's pull that back just a little bit. There we go. So that's for the third dimension, right? So, and then of course this cube is comprised of, so we've got our first dimension here, then we've got our second dimension here, and then we've got our third dimension here. And it isn't without the combination of those previous dimensions that we actually get our physical objects. Otherwise, none of these other dimensions exist unless you combine them. So, from a fourth dimensional standpoint, this changes a little bit, right? So, let's just erase these. So from a fourth dimensional standpoint, a physical object is going to be the fourth dimension. This plane that extends into infinity is going to be the third dimension, the line that extends into infinity is going to be the second dimension, and then the point is going to be the first dimension. And of course, like I said last time, this is why God couldn't be a fourth dimensional being, because our existence extends into infinity in all directions, our physical existence, and then our time existence is its reality, which of course, like our reality, also extends to infinity in all directions. So the stricture of omnipresence would not be able to be fulfilled. So then we're going to have to step up to the next dimension. And you're going to see how this cascades downwards. We have now, we're going to look at the fifth dimension. Right? So the fifth dimension, fifth dimensional objects would be their physical objects. Then the plane extending to infinity in all directions would be the fourth dimension. The line extending into infinity would be the third dimension. And the point would be the second dimension. So for a fifth dimensional being, once again, our existence is still extending into infinity, if even only in a theoretical sense, because they can't interact with it. So it doesn't work, because they can't actually take all of what we are and crush it down into a single describable point, right? So fifth doesn't work. Well, let's take another step upwards, and we're going to go to the sixth dimension. Sixth dimension, right? So now physical objects are sixth dimensional. The plane extending to infinity is the fifth dimension. The line extending to infinity is the fourth dimension. And the point is the third dimension. We're getting pretty close now, and I think you know where we're going with this. But omnipresence, we still can't fulfill that because the fourth dimension is still extending into infinity in all directions. We still can't take all of what our existence is and crush it down to a single describable spot. So we're going to have to take another step upwards. We're going to have to step up to the seventh dimension. And don't even try to imagine what that kind of existence was. You'll tie your brain into knots, because we can barely understand 3 dimensions. And then, things get really weird when we add the 4th. Anyway, so 7th dimension. Right. So, now we've got 7th dimensional objects being physical. 6th dimension being the theoretical plane extending to infinity in all directions. The 5th dimension being the line extending to infinity in all directions. And it's interesting, I'd like to point out that this line is theoretically made up of an infinite number of the previous dimension's points all lined up next to each other. They never touch or interact, but there's an infinite number of them that comprise this line. And then finally, the 4th dimension being that point. Now we have taken our existence, including our 4th dimensional existence, and crushed it all down to a single quantifiable point that can be described but not interacted with. They can theorize it, they can imagine it, but they can't actually do anything with it except in their own minds. And this is where we kind of step into the realm of philosophy a little bit, because being, as this point, can only be theoretical to the 7th dimensional being. It's only in their head, in their imagination, what they have created of it. And they can apply an arbitrary value in whatever the version of their Cartesian coordinate system would be, like that, and do math to it, and try to describe with their 7th dimensional terms what it is, but it doesn't actually really exist except in their mind. So I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that we are all figments of the imagination of a 7th dimensional being who has created this universe, our universe, simply by thinking about it. Which sort of fits in with Genesis, God created the universe just by saying, let it exist, which is pretty much exactly what happens when that 7th dimensional being describes this point using a coordinate or whatever. Now, that gets me to an interesting point. In the first video, when I told you all to imagine a 0th dimensional point, well, I just made you all gods of your own little universe, because you created that universe when you thought about it. So, treat your new universes with care. Now, to that effect, and the fact that I don't really believe in religion and stuff, I wanted to read you a quote from one of my favorite books. Well, not one of my favorite books, one of my favorite series, although this particular book is one of the better ones in that series. It's a series called The Dresden Files, written by Jim Butcher. And the particular book is called Changes. And he said something that was really quite very profound, and actually was one of the statements in the last couple of years that have helped me really come to terms with my own struggles with religion and faith and belief and God and whatever. So I wanted to read this to you guys. I'm going to paraphrase it slightly, but I'm not big on churches of any kind, despite the fact that I've spoken face to face with an archangel of the Almighty. It's part of the plot in the book. But there were some things that I believed in, some things that I had faith in. And faith isn't about perfect attendance to services or how much money you put on the little plate. It isn't about going skyclad to the holy rites or meditating each day upon the divine. Faith is about what you do. It's about aspiring to be better and nobler and kinder than you are. It's about making sacrifices for the good of others, even when there's not going to be anyone telling you what a hero you are. So, what he's saying there is, it doesn't take religion to be a good person, or to have faith in the divine, or faith in a greater intelligence, or just faith in the fact that people can be better. It just takes somebody believing that they can be. So, pack up your faith and use it to make the world a better place. Don't worry about tying yourself down to any religion. Just be good. Anyway, so hopefully you enjoyed that, and I can already hear, eventually, once the video gets seen by them, some Christians that are probably going to maybe take a little bit of umbrage at me trying to scientifically describe and justify the existence of God. But, like I said, with the whole, imagining the point in the universe popping into existence just because they thought about it, I found it very interesting when I was going through this whole thing that the only way I could fulfill, scientifically, the concept of omnipresence was to push the fourth dimension down to this point, which required me to theorize the existence of a seventh dimensional being. Now, a lot of Christians will recognize that the number 7 figures pretty heavily into the Bible. I just thought that was interesting. See you in a couple days.